Eye on Culture is sponsored by the Inatovich Family Foundation.
Eye on Culture.
Не бійся. Вигниєш ти і сам випадеш. Я не маю часу з тобою панькатись.
At the end of the 19th century, a young Vasyl Stefanyk submitted his collection of emotionally gripping novellas to a publisher, and he was categorically rebuffed. The editor stated that, although his stories showed talent, there was nothing in them that would serve the public, and they had no didactic value for a new generation. For that short-sighted individual, indeed for most Ukrainians of that and perhaps later time, service to the public meant serving the political needs of the day, and literature was to have a utilitarian function as a proclaimer of ideology. Forgotten, of course, was the universal truth, that the life of a nation is defined more by great cultural achievements than by political hustle and bustle for the fulfillment of perhaps urgent, but nonetheless temporary needs. Fortunately, in Krakow, where Stefanyk was studying medicine, his extraordinary talent was noticed by Polish intellectual Wacław Moraczewski, who not only doggedly encouraged Stefanyk to write, but also became the first translator of his works. And when the leading figure of Polish modernism, Stanisław Przybyszewski, became enraptured by Stefanyk's novellas and published them in the leading journal Life, Życie, suddenly the young author got the chance to become a player on the international literary stage. One by one, translations of his works into European languages began to appear, with responses of delight coming from even unexpected sources. For example, Maxim Gorky, who was not favorably inclined toward Ukrainian culture, began to advise experienced writers to read Stefanyk's works in order to see how succinctly and alarmingly he writes. At the turn of the century, Stefanyk was able to publish 3 collections in Ukrainian, and although they were well received by well-known writers, such as Ivan Franko and Lesya Ukrainka, the same could not be said for the rest of his reading audience. The wider Galician community was not so much indifferent to Stefanyk the writer, but rather treated him with suspicion and overt hostility. Particularly strong criticism was leveled at Stefanyk's literary masterpieces, such as his novellas News, Novina, in which Stefanyk describes the plight of a destitute father who makes an agonizing decision to drown his children, or Thief, Zlodyi, about peasants taking the law into their own hands and dealing with a local thief. Stefanyk was angrily accused of sullying the honor of the Galician peasantry, and this community provocation became so painful for the sensitive author that 2 years after his brilliant debut, at the height of his literary accomplishments, Stefanyk fell silent and wrote nothing more for a long time afterward. Under pressure from the people around him, Stefanyk devoted himself to politics. He became a member of Austrian parliament and a local community activist. But how small and short-lived were his achievements in this arena in relation to what he might have achieved in the sphere of culture? In the opinion of literary scholars, at the beginning of the 20th century, Stefanyk had the unique opportunity to consolidate his position and thus his language, literature, and nation within world culture. Famous Polish Jewish critic Henryk Hersheles called Stefanyk the first writer of his nation with an entirely individual and unique artistic cast, and he placed Stefanyk's novellas in a higher literary category than the works of Nobel laureate Władysław Reymont. Ihor Kosecki also wrote about the very realistic possibility for Stefanyk to have won the Nobel Prize for Literature for Ukraine, maintaining that his lack of success in world literature represents a particularly grievous chapter in Ukrainian collective guilt. Stefanyk himself, oppressed by the hostile attacks of his countrymen, stated that he will not and cannot write in the way that they were dictating. And it was only after many years in Vienna, far from the homegrown critics, that he began to write anew. He also wrote during the 1920s, but he never again had the opportunity to shine on the international stage. Stefanyk remained a lesser-known author, representing an unknown nation, and his entire literary corpus fills out the pages of one rather small book. It was not until the second half of the 20th century, in the West, that insightful and erudite analyses of Stefanyk's works began to appear. Important among these was the book by Canadian scholar Alexandra Chernenko, who showed that Stefanyk did not belong to the realist school, as Soviet critics claimed, but to the expressionist trend within modernism that had just started to take hold in Europe at the time that Stefanyk was writing his first novellas. Expressionists were not interested in portraying social or political themes in their works. Even the psychology of their characters was secondary, because art for them was a medium for metaphysical exploration, for reaching far beyond superficial reality, beyond the mirage of subjects and phenomena, right into the heart of existence, into the sphere of the spirit and the soul. The artist expressionist did not seek morality or beauty in his art, because he found all expressions of the soul to be equal: beauty and ugliness, good and evil, life and death. The expressionist sought to reveal the essence of a person, that which makes a person not just a biological entity, but a spiritual being, and thus tried to reveal the essence of life itself. This is why the protagonists of Stefanyk's stories are not intellectuals with natures hidden behind the masks of erudition and civility, but simple peasants in extreme life circumstances who end up bearing the depths of their souls in response. And this is why Stefanyk did not depict the superficial social processes that his politically minded contemporaries so crave to see, but rather the universal dilemmas that mark human existence. Oleksandra Chernenko shows how the motifs and creative methods employed by Stefanyk are organically connected with the work of later artists, such as the great Franz Kafka. Generally speaking, in the same way that his countryman from eastern Ukraine, Mykola Get, represented the vanguard of expressionism in painting, so Stefanyk had a well-defined place among the first major expressionist prose writers. And thus Stefanyk could have had a major role in the history of world culture, if he had had support, if he could have found the strength to go up against the pressure of his uncultured environment. But the story of Stefanyk's defeat, which was at the same time the defeat of an entire nation, should serve as a cautionary tale. We should all learn to acknowledge and appreciate that which is of a higher caliber than our usual taste and knowledge, even if it is unfamiliar or not understandable to us. On behalf of Dr. Marko Stech, I'm Tania Stech. See you next time on Eye on Culture.
Очима культури спонсороване фундацією родини Ігнатович.
Очима культури.